Hey, what's up guys, welcome back to the channel. So if you click this video, you're probably interested in or have applied to one of the big four. Or maybe you're just curious to see what it takes to get a job at one of the big four. Well, I'm here to give you some interview and assessment centre tips and tricks that can help you get a job. So I personally come from an engineering background, but I've been through the recruitment process and actually had to tailor myself to getting a financial role at one of the big four, which I've now secured. So I thought I'd talk to you about a different take on how you can get yourself one of those roles without having come from a financial background necessarily. So the first and biggest piece of advice that I can give anyone applying to any role, not just this one, is to get your narrative set before you start the interview process. One of the biggest skills that you can have is storytelling. Now, I'm not talking about telling lies or remembering ancient Greek tales. What I'm talking about is convincing people of your point of view or making a concise and collected point whenever you want to. So one of the most important things you can do in an interview is make a point that you want to make and ensure that the story backs up that point and shows the interviewer all of the key skills that you want to show along the way. So one key way to think about this for interviews and assessment centres that you can work on at home is to think about what you want the person interviewing you to take away at the end of the interview. What image of you do you want them to think of? And then think about how you frame your narrative of how you came to choose that company or that role that shows that side of you that you can then link together in the story. So for me, this was incredibly important. Coming from an engineering background, I didn't have the core financial skills from people who'd done economics at university or other similar courses or people who'd done placements in financial companies. So I had to make sure that my narrative was linked to the role that I was applying for and the company that I applied to, and just to ensure that it all flowed nicely, to make sure the story I was telling about myself was correct. So storytelling is a great way to convince people of your point of view. So that's my key piece of advice in general for all assessment centres. But let's get on to some more specific things for the Big Four. So one of the key things that's been relied on more and more is behavioural and personality traits that come out in your interview. So people interviewing you are no longer just looking for a robot that fills a role and can basically count beans till time is past. What they want is somebody that works well as a team, because a high functioning team is way better than a group of individuals working by themselves. So one of the key things you need are good behavioural and communication skills. So the easiest first step for this is to dress for the job. That's better. So just make sure that you're dressing appropriately for the job that you're applying for. If it's something that's likely to have high client relationships or is in a professional environment, then a suit is probably what you need to wear to your interview or your assessment centre. One thing I would always say is you don't want to be the least well-dressed person there. It's always better to dress up for an occasion than it is to be dressed down. So aim to be the smartest looking person in the room, no matter what. Now I'm going to go back to being comfy for the rest of the video. Now your next easy step to remember is that the interviewer is human too. Sure, it may seem scary going into an office to do an interview or doing a virtual interview over the internet, but you need to remember the person you're talking to is just a human. Whether they're HR or a senior manager or a director at the company that you're applying to, they're just people. So they enjoy a smile and good manners as much as everyone else. It can really set the tone of the interview if you start with good manners and politeness and a smile. So one of the next big behavioural habits that you need to avoid is fidgeting. Now, I know this sounds really petty, but twiddling your thumbs, biting your nails, or playing with a pen or anything like that can come across as nervousness and can make it seem like you're not prepared for the interview because you're nervous about what you're going to say. So one way you can practice this at home is if you find yourself fidgeting, just become consciously aware of it, and whilst you're aware of it, try and stop it from happening. It's okay if it happens a few times in an interview, but you don't want to be remembered as the person who kept playing with their pen or kept twiddling their thumbs. One way that you can get around this that I think is really, really easy to do is ask for a glass of water before you go into your interview that you can take in with you. So if you feel yourself getting nervous, just center yourself by holding the glass of water or by taking a drink to calm yourself down and give yourself a few seconds. This obviously has the added benefit of stopping you from getting a sore throat, but on top of that, there's a secret hidden tip with glasses of water, which is that if you get asked a difficult question, no one thinks it's weird for you to take a sip and buy yourself 3 or 4 seconds to think about the question. So a glass of water in the interview is one thing that I find really useful. And the next and final behavioural tip is just to be confident with your answers. I know this is something that's said again and again, But I don't just mean be confident on the positives and say that you're the best in the world. I mean be confident on the negatives too. So if they ask you for what's your biggest drawback, or if they ask when's a time you led a team, then you can give them the positives and the negatives and be confident on the negatives and why they were negatives and how you would improve them in future and what you've learned. Being confident about both your positives and negatives is a key way to prove that you're a rounded individual and you've learned from your previous errors. So then we move on to the technical front. Now, one of the key things you're going to need to do before you go into the interview is predict the type of questions you're going to get. Now, we don't all have a crystal ball around, but we have got a really useful set of key things we can look at. The most important thing you can look at before going into the interview is the job application itself. So what does the job entail? What key skills can you pick out from the application that they will probably ask you questions on? So if it's financial and maths based, you can expect that there'll be some technical competency questions on your analytics and understanding of data. Now, they might not ask you incredibly detailed financial things that you don't know about already, but they may ask you, for example, simple maths or simple data analytics and presenting that information to other people, because those are core skills to do with the role. But the most common skills that I see are teamwork, leadership, communication skills, working in a competitive environment, and your versatility. So one of the key things that you can do is list those down and just come up with questions centered around them. So examples of these might be, demonstrate a time that you led a team effectively, or explain to me how you had to change your method of communication in a certain instance to get better results, or give an example of how you worked well as a team. These are all the kind of questions that you could get which fall under those categories. So then once you've got those questions, it's time to apply the STAR method. So the STAR method breaks down situation, task, action, result. And it's a really good way of approaching interview questions because it gives you that step-by-step narrative that I was talking about earlier. It explains how you got to the final decision and how you were shaped along the way to get there. And remember, when you're answering interview questions, not everything has to be perfect. You don't have to have had the most perfect team leadership experience. Somebody who says that they were the best leader for this team and they achieved more than any other team had in the past, that will go down quite well. But what will probably go down significantly better is if you say, I led a team in this, here's what I did really well as team leader, here's what I think we lacked as a team, and here's what I learned and how I'll apply it in future. That shows that you're not just trying to show off how good you are as a leader, but that you're actually able to learn from your past experiences, and that's something valuable in the workplace. So to go along with predicting these questions, you can expect other questions to do with the field or the job itself. So for these, you need to do some research. Step 1 for any job application, which I'm sure you will have heard over and over again, but it counts for a lot in the Big Four because they do like to ask these questions, is to make sure you research the company you're applying to and also research the competition. So the company you're applying to, you want to know what their core values are, what their beliefs are, what the role is going to involve, and what working for them on a day-to-day basis might entail, because those are really crucial things to know. But also know what the competition offer in those situations as well, to know why you didn't pick the competition. So if you're going for a role at KPMG and they say, so why did you pick KPMG? You can answer with not just why KPMG as a company resonates with your values, but you can also say why the competitors don't resonate with your values. Because at the end of the day, if you get an interview for any of the Big Four, you probably could have got an interview at any of the other companies. So they want to know why they're special to you. You then also need to research the market in general. So if you're applying for audit, get a few big news stories about audit and learn about a few of the audit clients that the company has. If you're applying to be an actuary, learn about the actuarial market and about insurance in general. These are things you can draw on in the interview, and even if you can't draw on them, at the end of the interview when you have time for questions, you can use those as banker questions to just say, if you can't think of anything else, what's your opinion on this that's happening in the market? Which shows your business acumen and your awareness of the whole industry. And finally, some optional research you can do is into the history of the company and looking at their past experiences. This rarely comes up in interviews, but it can be useful to know some key facts about the company just to show off that you really have done your work. So then we have some assessment center specific things. So this is when you're most likely to be doing group work rather than a one-to-one interview. So the behavioural things I said earlier are even more key in a group work example. At the end of the day, a group work example isn't about being the most technically competent person there, because if you're technically competent but you work by yourself, there's no point in you being in a group example. You should be doing individual work and they won't hire you. So the best thing you can do is listen, take on board what others have said, and bring your own points to the table and try to encourage people to join in. One of the key ways that I like to remember this is that you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So if you're in a group work situation, you have twice as much listening power as you do talking power, or at least you should. So try and listen to what other people are saying, really take it on board, and come back at their points with added information, or challenge them if you think that something they've said isn't quite accurate. This is one of the best ways that interviewers and examiners will see that you are really, really good at teamwork and team playing. And a big part of this is also remembering that you're not actually in competition with the people in the room with you when you're doing group exercises. Sure, you do want to make sure that you show off your best self, but putting other people down isn't going to get you anywhere. So don't put other people down to bring yourself up. That's really not going to fly. One really big thing you can also do in group exercises is just remember that there are other people there. If there are people not contributing or they aren't engaging as much with the content in the group exercise as you are, bring them on board, ask what they think of things. One really, really good way you can incorporate people is if somebody's being quiet in the group, you can make a point of saying, I notice you haven't said much. Perhaps you've been listening and you've heard something that we might have missed. Would you be willing to share it? That brings somebody on board, but also shows you're aware of the fact that you might have missed something and you want to get the best out of everybody. This is an excellent way to build team efforts and show that you have really, really good team working skills. And the final thing you can do in team exercises is to delegate work and to notify others once you've finished your bit of work. So if it's a group exercise that looks like it's going to take 20 minutes, break it down into manageable chunks and then hand them out to different people. And once you've finished your work, be the first person to put your hand up and say, okay, I think I'm done with my section, I'm confident with my answer. Does anyone else need my help? This puts you in a great position and the interviewers will absolutely love this. So finally, we come to ending the interview. So to end an interview, you will almost always be asked if you have any questions you want to ask the interviewer. This is a really good time to showcase how good you are. So you want to pick 1 or 2 things that you've picked up during the interview process and think about questions that you can ask around those. So I like to be brave in interviews and I like to ask the interviewer as many questions as I can at the end. But one of the key ones I rely on is to ask them why they joined the company and why they're still there. What is it about the role that excites them and keeps them at the company? Because this is your valuable insight into what life at the company is really like. People don't stay at companies if the work isn't good and if the people around them aren't fun. So that's something you really need to get a good insight on, is what the social side of work is, as well as the actual real life working experience. This is where you can also draw in on those banked questions that I spoke about earlier. So these are the questions that you can pull out about the market or about the company's history that you can just have saved up from before the interview, so you know you've got something to ask about if you need to. And finally, when you come to the end of the interview, a handshake and good manners goes a long way. So just finish with a good handshake, be polite, thank the interviewer for their time, and let them know you look forward to hearing from them. And that's all you really need to do. You don't need to do any fancy send-off or review anything else. Just be polite and leave them with a positive image of you. And once you've done that, that's it. You can de-stress. You've made it through the interview, your job is done, you just cross your fingers that you've got the job. And then finally, I've got a couple of additional pointers if you've still got a few years ahead of you before applying to these kinds of jobs. The first is to get as much real-world experience as you can. So I'm talking get placements, get internships, get apprenticeships if you can. Try and do as much different work as you can to expose yourself to the work environment so you can learn from it and apply it in your interview. And also, network as much as you can. So the key thing that I would say is make a good LinkedIn account, make it look professional, get a professional headshot for your cover photo, and then start sending that around and adding people from different networks that you might want to talk to and that might be useful in future. Because at the end of the day, the old adage is true. It's all about who you know, not what you know. So finally, for all of you, I've listed in the description a few questions that you might get asked in interviews and assessment centres, which might be similar to the ones that I got asked, or at least in the same vein, so you know what to expect and you can start drafting answers using the STAR method I spoke about earlier. Now, there's no guarantee those questions are accurate and that those questions will come up, but it's the style of question that you will get asked time and time again at these kinds of job interviews. So as always, hit the like button if you did enjoy the video, subscribe if you're new around here, leave a comment with what you want to see in the future and what you thought of this video, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.